Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the LIC podcast. We've got myself, Lindsay. We've got Matt.
Hello.
We've got Hannah.
Hello.
We've got Jose.
Hi.
And this week we are talking about I Saw the TV Glow, A24 horror drama film that I've got some thoughts on. And I had thoughts on the first time I had seen it. This was now the second time. And then this was everybody else's first time seeing it. So we are here to chat about that a little bit. And maybe other people want to share their thoughts before I kind of jump in on a lot of mine, since I obviously have a bit more thoughts and sitting with it for as long. So anybody excited to take it away?
My first, as soon as that movie ended, well, while it was ending, all I could think about was how freaking clever I thought it was. So I guess we'll get into the meat and potatoes of that. But initially, very impressed. And that's it. That's all I got for
Hannah, you look like
for
you have a
very
thought.
first
You look like you have a
impression.
thought.
I'm still digesting, so
Yeah.
I feel like I don't know. I'm gonna like work my way through this conversation, but I'm like sitting in the middle to low middle. I think as first impressions, I don't know. The vibe maybe wasn't for me. A lot of movies have this thing where they have this long, confusing period of time where it's just like they're leaving it ambiguous on purpose. And I think there are places for that. And sometimes it might just be a tasting. Sometimes I really don't enjoy it when that's a really, really, really long part of the movie. And I have no indications of like, are we close to the end? Or are we at the halfway point? Like, it's just very disorienting. And that can be a choice. So I don't know. I'm hoping my opinions will form up throughout this conversation.
I felt the movie was incomplete from just watching it and having known nothing about it prior to a little bit of the more meta context that we're beginning to build after having watched the movie and realizing this is actually a bridge film in what appears to be a screen trilogy that makes it make more sense and lightly assuages the issues that I had in terms of the incompleteness of it because of the fact that it seems to be like a jumping pad. And from the light bits that I've read, a lot of it is actually callbacks to the first movie that we haven't seen. And apparently, if you think this is clever, you might even think it's more or even less, maybe less clever.
Yeah, potentially less clever.
Once you see the fact that it's doing callback-esque things to the first one. And I didn't want to read too into it, but I did feel that made the movie make more sense in that way, you know, because the way that I was feeling, it was just too confused and not in a, that really made me ponder. It was like, why did they run out of like digital film or like what?
You never know these days.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So that was, I went from very, very intense kind of angry confusion to more understandable confusion now.
I think it's a really good, I don't know. I think this film lacks story structure in a lot of ways, which is something I definitely want to get into. In just why is it that we leave the film, even if it is part of a trilogy, why is it we leave feeling very unsatisfied? And it's a feeling we can get away with in certain mediums.
Unless you're Matt.
Right.
Yeah, right. I'm completely satisfied.
Yes,
So
I will get into that. I'm really curious because in short films, that type of ending and that type of like, we've kind of almost stopped in the middle in a way, or like you use the word bridge, can work in a short because it can be intrigue to make a feature length film. But in a feature, there's just some more things that we're kind of yearning for from a story structure standpoint. And I think this film really lacks in that. And then I really agree with Hannah's point with ambiguity. And I really struggle. One of the reasons I wanted to bring this film to the table as well is it's very much like a film festival film. And having gone to just a couple of festivals this year and seeing the quality be so ranging, there's something really interesting about watching an intermediate level film as opposed to like a master level film, because we don't lose ourselves in the filmmaking as much. We're more aware of the choices being made, which I think it makes it easier to almost dissect it and talk about it because we're so aware of like wow, we're on a really angled street right now, which our shot is straight, but it's giving me a feeling of a Dutch angle because the street in front of the house is super angled. And that's like, it's really easy to talk about those I guess choices that can be made in filmmaking, but the ambiguity, and I struggle with in filmmaking or in film festival type films, indie films, is that like if we throw a bunch of really cool shots together, we're telling a story.
This is what I struggled with too,
Mm-hmm.
where like with this movie in particular, because I feel somewhat unsatisfied, but not by the ending or the way that the story played out. I feel like most of the time was spent world building, but we completely neglected character development. Like, and I think it could be an on purpose thing to say their whole friendship is based on this TV show, and maybe their whole characters are based on the TV show, right? But it just, I don't know, it felt lacking for me.
I liked what I felt were the inspirations for the air of the movie, which is like Goosebumps / Are You Afraid of the Dark?
Yeah,
Very
much.
Kind of, you know, Teen Nick kind of feeling in both the setting up of the Pink Opaque and all of the and the movie itself, like, you know, because the movie is supposedly a layered fiction, right? Where like you don't know where the TV starts and where reality begins for Owen / Isabel, you know, inside of their own mindscape. Because so because of that, I personally, right, as a 90s kid myself, was really was endeared by those formatting choices and having that be the driving medium by which they try to showcase this kind of pretty much like, yeah, are you afraid of, like, scary stories to tell in the dark kind of stories, you know? And I don't know if perhaps that is like they're using like a generational hook in that way that gets me, you know, more endeared toward it than perhaps if I were like maybe 10 years younger or 10 years older.
Yeah, I think if you're not a millennial person, this movie does not make sense.
Well, and
at
I
all.
wonder, I think that that's one of the big strengths is this like nostalgia horror. I think that's a really interesting genre that we're playing with in this film.
Very good.
That it's like that. I mean, like the, you know, the big balloon or the big, you know, what do we call parachute that we had in grade school in the gym, like, and the chalk on the street and the ice cream truck. And like, there's just these things that are so nostalgic. That actually I want to jump into one of those points that they make in the film that I think is really interesting, is watching a TV show later in life that we watched as a kid, and it feels metaphorically and possibly literally different. And I think that's, again, this nostalgia horror that when we look back on things, they don't sit with us in the same way. And something that was really impactful for us when we were young, all of a sudden we get older and it either means nothing or it feels terrible or it feels worse. And I've had the question, and there have been the questions of things literally changing, you know, when they move from DVD to streaming platform or from the theater to DVD to streaming platform, that there are edits that actually happen because they got reviews and they're able to actually change things without advertising. They've changed things. So it's almost a Mandela effect that can actually happen. So literally changing it. And in this example, it's almost like it was literally changed. So to gaslight this person into not realizing that they were of a different world. And then the version that we then live with in our reality of things aren't the same as when I was a kid. And how do I kind of get back to that? But I don't want to get back to it, but also I miss that. And there's that really weird relationship. And I'm wondering how other people kind of took that moment or this kind of genre of nostalgia horror from that angle.
Yeah, it's a very dark tug of war in that way because it makes you question the validity of your convictions. Because if you think that something is so great the first time you're watching, God, you know, like this is like some life-changing storyline situation, right? And then 15 years go by and you rewatch it and be like, tropey. Like, oh, wow, knowing where they're going to take the story now too, and then being like, oh no, that's not going to lead to anything now, you know, like having all of that foresight then makes it so you have to question, okay, I thought this was so great back then. It's like, how do I even know that what I think is great now is even, you know, will stand that kind of test of time, because I do feel that whether we all want to, you know, seem it or not, there is some level of like legacy desire in our likes, you know, that like, oh, what I like is so timeless and so, you know, in touch with the literal human zeitgeist that even if I watch it 20 years later, it's still gonna. And 99% of the things that we like and see probably don't do that, you know.
I still love Naruto.
No, yeah, for
Just
sure.
kidding, I'm just kidding.
And it is very interesting when some things do that, right? But even then, even like getting to have here in the future, right, quote unquote future of all of those things we liked back now, or getting the whole block of the thing now because it's done or canceled or whatever now, allows you to have more of a, you know, 4D look at the object that is the media itself and be like, okay, yeah, that whole situation was good. Ooh, that's not good. You know,
Exactly. We see what works and what doesn't.
yeah,
in a
as
different
opposed
way.
to having to like the ant on the jewel live, you know, on top of it and see it occur at the same time, and you don't get to see those imperfections that close in, you know, in that way, which is kind of what it appears the movie's lightly trying to say. You know, I have a hard time really pinning down the movie's desires in terms of like terrible part of it, because it really feels like there's some parable in here.
I have some thoughts on that too.
Yeah, my like broad theory for this movie is that it's not like a real movie. I don't think like the characters and the setting and everything, like I don't think that that's at all what's important at all. Like the things that happen in the movie are too, but like my overarching theory is that like this whole movie is about the pink opaque or like the rose tinted glasses that we view our childhood through.
Okay.
And so everything is a statement on that. Like it almost feels a little hammy. Like it's almost like platform level hammy of like the pink opaque is literally the name of the show, that like that's how you might view your childhood and how your childhood memories are all kind of jumbled and blended together. And because you didn't really understand the adult world, things were more real in fiction. And so that affects you even further. And when you're younger, you're a little schizophrenic. So it just compounds on itself.
No, it is literally.
Yeah, literally. And then when you look back as an adult and you're like, what happened? You know, that's kind of what it feels like to me. The movie is about, generally speaking.
Yeah. So you're saying the movie, instead of it being so emphasized on like plot, story, character, where actually the movie itself is the feeling that's being evoked. It's the whole thing itself is. That's a really interesting way of looking at it. And I like, maybe that was the draw for me to like, it's doing something, but like Jose said, I'm also not sure what it's doing. And I do still feel I'm become very passionate about story structure. And I'm like, could it have done it more successfully while still adhering to a story structure is a question I ask. But I really like this idea of the pink opaque itself being the way we view our childhood and giving us that feeling of nostalgia through the film itself. And, you know, like Jose was saying, I've been using the words like viewing something prefrontal lobe versus post-frontal lobe. And I find I view movies extremely differently from like just watching them like 4 years ago, 5 years ago versus now. And there's something in that. And like when we go through time and view things differently. That's a really interesting point though. I don't know.
I like that perspective, especially. It makes that like in the arcade scene where he's like, somebody help me, I'm literally dying right now, so much more relatable.
Yeah, because he's
like,
an adult.
oh no.
And there's like the kid part of him, or the kid part of us, is slowly dying as we get older and older. It's suffocating. And every once in a while, you're in the midst of the rat race. And some people, I mean, this like where the term going postal comes from, just fucking snap. And it makes complete sense because as a kid, the world is magical and beautiful. And as you get older, you realize things are actually terrible in a lot of places. Like, there's plenty of things to be happy about. But you start to question, like, is this really what we're meant to do? Is go to work at the fun zone for 8 hours a day and then go home and watch TV until we fall asleep? and there's this uncomfortable, like, this can't be like what
This
life
can't be
is
it.
really about.
Can't be it.
And it causes people to explode.
And they talk about time moving really fast.
Mhm.
And that being a big part of why they want to go, like why they need to go back is like, this isn't right. This isn't how life is supposed to feel.
Yeah.
I think about that stuff all the time.
Yep.
I often have, and this is why I think it resonated with me, especially in the second half. I mean, again, I struggle because the movie really started when she comes back, and there's just so much leading up to that. Like Hannah said earlier, that I think it becomes pretentious in my opinion, or like self-indulgent.
Pretentious,
It
I think,
just-
is a good word.
Yeah, and I struggle with that a lot, where it's just nobody in the editing room was like, "Hey, you need to cut this in half," and then see what level of what level we're at if we have to trim. And I'm curious about that, but it resonates with me because I've always felt reality was very off, and it's like, what is the solution to that is a question that I've asked. And I think a lot of people have that feeling of offness and the feeling of time not quite adding up. And even Jose, you were pointing out as we were watching it, like episode 500, like how did we get there,
I
and
do
like,
have to note the fact that I think that what that was happening was that in the episode guide it goes 504 as in like
Exactly.
season
right.
5 episode
yeah,
4.
episode 4. Yeah.
I was like, okay, that makes a lot more sense
Yeah.
relative to it. I was,
Right. But still, that's already interesting. And they had, this Mr. Melancholy big bad guy be able to manipulate time and reality. Like that's his ability. And there's something so interesting that as we get older, Mr. Melancholy
Mr.
sits
Melancholy.
deeper inside of us,
We
and it
start drinking the
manipulates
juice.
time and reality so we can no longer see the pink opaque that we could as children.
I always think it's these types of American malaise movies are interesting from an immigrant's perspective because you know how Matt's like, oh, like when you're a child, life is wonderful. From Honduras, life people don't let you think that way. You know, life is not that wonderful. You know, and relative to that, coming to the United States where they tell you normalcy is peaceful here, and like, oh, okay, you do personally feel like you take that in far slower as opposed to where for you guys, right? This world has always been the normalcy for you. So you literally do operate it at a Sims level of, twice the speed kind of situation because you already operating within it and that's all you know, right? Yep. But having been ripped from one section from one midnight realm to another midnight realm kind of situation, I do feel the time distortion in the same way, but it also doesn't happen as quickly because I
Yeah.
never feel that odd occurrence that everybody notes that they'd be like, oh, time's moving so fast. I don't feel that way too often. I really do feel every moment going by. And even in retrospect, maybe as a result of always having had a pretty sharp memory, I can remember things very, very well. So things don't as easily for me that in that way. So watching these things, and understanding that this is a very universal zeitgeist feeling that people here in the United States have, and in other first world countries, I always find it, like I was saying, charming because I get to kind of peer into what everybody else kind of feels like in that way.
Oh, yeah.
Of being like, oh, this is so drab, and oh my gosh, I can't believe we're living in peaceful times, and it's and not to make fun because it's great, that we actually do get to live in this level of normalcy, but it's understandable that once this is all like it naturally everything begins to hurry along because at that point it isn't a day by day thing, it's a phase by phase or like almost epoch at that point because only certain markers become significant in your 20s and in your 30s. And at that point, those markers have to be self-wrought because otherwise they're not going to come to you like they did when you were a teenager, like, like puberty and just graduating high school or graduating middle school. Like those things, at least in this country, come to you because of the whole no child left behind thing. So it's like, it's not like nobody's not going to graduate,
Yeah.
But eventually society is just like, all right, well, that's the end of the merits, that we're going to like pre-package for you. At this point, you got to go look for those, And it really made me wonder what was it about Owen, aside from obviously him having to deal with this like midnight realm potentiality situation that caused him to become so have such a arrested development with himself in that way.
So
Because it's like, yeah, his mom died, right? But she died when he was like 17, right? And it seems like he had already being withdrawn even before that.
Yeah.
And it's just, yeah, I don't know. That situation, like that characterization for him, for me, just felt too bumpy to like really slip inside his skin kind of situation, you know, and just be like, okay, this is why you ended up in the fun zone. Because that also isn't the universal situation, because not everybody's leading boring lives relative to their own mind, right? So it's like certain people do genuinely feel like they're surpassing themselves, right? So what is it about Owen that is keeping him in that place?
Well, and I think I kind of think there's just a style. There's a real choice being made that the place we see him end up and spending most of his time is called the fun center. You know, like there's something so like painfully a slap in the face of like, we are watching you waste away at the fun center. That is so almost just a quality of the fundamental paradoxes of the human experience a little bit. But I do want to touch on what you were saying about him as a main character. And there's something about this film too, that I had learned after watching it the first time research wise, is there is like a queer trans narrative apparently happening.
I was wondering about
that. I felt a little bit, when I learned that, I was like, well, that almost like kind of convolutes it a little more for me in a way that I'm like, if we're telling that story, now we're telling that story. But it's like, it felt like we weren't telling that, but I had moments where I was like, are we telling that? And that's one element that's possibly happening with his kind of, his character and the way he does feel so off in reality, I think is potentially that narrative happening. But that's also a fundamental problem I have with this, especially on the second watch, is that our main character is so passive. And I really struggle with that. I really struggle with our protagonist, just things happening, and I just have to go through and be like, oh, this happened too. And I'm just seeing images of things happen to our main character. And again, fundamental error in story structure, when we just have someone that stuff is just happening to, and there's no choice, there's no autonomy, there's no, why are we going to the next moment? Because we're watching someone make a choice to go to the next moment. And I really struggle with that. And I mean, that's a fundamental like lacking thing in my opinion in any movie if we're dealing with someone extremely passive.
Agree.
So that's one thing too that I very much agree with, the feeling of his character, especially, I mean, the first time we see him make a real choice, well, we see once when she's like, we're going to leave, and he goes to his friend's mom house or ex-friend's mom house and says, you have to tell my dad I've been lying to him, so I'm grounded, so I can't go with her. And it's like, there's a real choice happening there.
Well, be fair, his first choice was lying to his parents altogether and going to the sleepover.
Very good point.
Right,
very good point.
From the very beginning, which showcased autonomy and the desire to want to break out of whatever, shell he might have been in at that moment. Where I was like, okay, cool. Like, it's gonna be some sort of self-discovery situation where they become like besties, and like, he's a little younger than her, and
even then, it still feels so passive. Like there's just no sense of like, I need to do this. And I really lacked that in the film of like, I gotta go see the Pinko Pig.
You know what really annoys me about this whole situation with having this whole, are they in the midnight realm thing, right? Is that all of those things can be brushed aside by being like, oh, he's just having like dark energies like stifle his his aura or his like way of being to the degree that this is just how he has to act, because Mr. Melancholy is like pushing down on him from the personification of his parents and his dead mom, and you know what I mean? Like
this is what encourages me to not view the movie like a movie, because it's things like that.
Yeah. See,
because it had to be a choice. There's no way the director was like, I want this movie to feel incredibly monotonous with your acting choices, like that, like without
justice really get boring.
That they just didn't notice. Like that's crazy. They obviously were like, I want this feeling. I want you both to feel stifled. And so maybe that like, and it does give that, and it's just taxing to watch it in a way. And that's like some of the reviews I've seen about it is people being like, I don't like the world that I'm in, and I don't like the people I'm watching in the world. And like, I know that's the point. So it makes me there's something then good happening because it's the feeling that they're trying to evoke is working. And so there's something in that.
Yeah, there's a reason they use liminal spaces throughout the entire movie.
Absolutely.
Like,
Is my viewing saving the characters, or are the characters saving themselves in that way? One thing that I didn't really quite understand about what the movie,
Ooh, that's an interesting idea.
because it's like, is my active viewership one of the things that is going to make it so he breaks out, or is he going to be breaking out regardless of whether somebody's watching or not, kind of thing? And it doesn't feel like he would unless somebody's watching, kind of like a TV show,
Yeah. Yeah, it makes me feel like it's the latter, just because, like, it's sort of like, I don't know, that's how life happens, right? It just sort of happens at you. A lot of the times you're not really making decisions.
I wondered if that's what the passiveness of the character was a commentary on. I think like especially like with our generation, right? Because it like aims at, I feel like, millennials a lot. And I mean, obviously I haven't lived in any other generation. But I think a lot of millennials feel like stuff is just happening, and they're just getting moved forward.
Maybe it's a matter of like, is it Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Is that is it, right? I was going to confuse it with Maslow.
I was thinking that too.
The dog conditioning. I get you.
Yeah, the hierarchy of needs one. I wonder if perhaps this is supposed to be like a critique and assessment of how when you don't even have the basic building blocks of your essence, like sexuality slash, gender role play, like the gender you actually want to affirm yourself under and the guise of, right? If those things are always so hazy, there's no means by which you can place the next building blocks. Like, what do I want to be when I get out of school? And, what, how can I begin to be assertive in my own self? Because like he said in the bleachers, right? It's like, he knows there's something wrong with him. And he knows that there are these hazy blocks, opaque, pieces of himself that there's no means by which he knows, and maybe this is also a critique of 90s lack of therapy, perhaps,
Definitely.
The growing mental health crisis.
The growing mental health crisis from, that's burgeoning in the 90s, and the fact that, like, there is no mental crisis in America.
There isn't one.
Yeah, and I would feel that would make a lot of sense in that, his foundation is still so oblique to himself that there's no means by which he can then move on to the next scale of himself. And I this is one of those situations where I kind of go against myself because I like slim and trim movies where they don't give you too much, like, and this is my abusive dad, like
Same.
They didn't do that in this movie, which I really applaud them for. But at the same time, I have there's a little bit of inconsistency with me in the sense, again, with Owen's origin of Arrested Development, because it doesn't really feel like his mom or his dad are that stifling, and it begins from the very beginning because, like, he tells them, hey, I'm going to go over to my friend's house to sleep over, right? Maybe I would be too much of a helicopter parent, but I would call the other kid's family and be like, hey, listen, I heard that they're trying to, plan something, I was like, because trying to make sure that I can drop them off at whatever.
I was just going to say, that wasn't us.
90s,
You were a kid in the 90s, right? We were just like, bye.
Yeah, the 90s.
And then we walked to our friend's house.
I would say as a child in the 90s, and like for Jared, it was very much like, hey, I'm biking over to Greg's, and he would be gone for a night, two nights, like, and mom wouldn't call necessarily. And I would say,
okay, well, wonderful.
It was very typical.
And I guess that adds credence to the
tracks.
fidelity of the era that the movie's trying to show. Because from my perspective, again, it's not about whether that was the normal aspect of it. It's about the stiflingness of his parents and how that's supposed to, in my opinion, supposed to be a grain adding to his inability to grow up, right?
Well,
it's like his parents never let him, like, they never allowed him to make permissible mistakes like that, so because of that, he got so stifled that he became the adult that we see at the very end. But I actually didn't feel that.
Well, and I don't necessarily think that was the point of the parents' role, to be overly stifling. I think that's more maybe the queer, growing up queer in a family that is not supportive of that. They're showing that narrative a little bit there, because in reality, you know, we learn that everybody around him is technically distractions, or they're distractions invented by Mr. Melancholy to keep him in the world and not realize his potential, right? And so and I don't necessarily think we're meant to feel like anybody else in the world besides our two characters are real. I don't think we're meant to feel depth from them, because we are meant to feel that they are invented, and our character feels off in a world where no one else around them feels quite real. They're like NPCs, and they're the only playable, they're like real characters, real avatars. And then on top of that, at the very end, when he sees, oh, I am in fact I am more than this world. I am not of this world. I am of a different world. I see the insides of myself, and this is not right. But instead of being like, now I must bury myself and go live in the world I'm meant to, I'm going to apologize for making a scene in front of everybody around me in a world that I know is not real. And that is deeply unnerving, because we get the confirmation that I am more, and I am still, it's not enough for me. And I don't believe it, even with that confirmation. So, but I hear what you mean. He feels very stifled. And I think that's part of the problem that Hannah mentioned earlier, with the beginning is so long and indulgent and ambiguous, and it makes us feel this story is going to be about this young person being stifled and figuring out themselves in a world that's holding them down, and it's actually not that. And
it's actually a superhero movie.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, and that's why it's like the structure feels so lacking to me, because, you know, Act 1 being basically what we got for the first half of the movie, and Act 2 being them either trying to get back or getting back to the other world, to the Pink Opaque world, and then Act 3, the merge of the Midnight Realm and the Pink Opaque world. And that's like fundamental story structures. We have World 1, World 2, the merging of two worlds, and they have such a strong setup for that that I felt extremely unsatisfied by, like, oh, there's so much here that can be utilized, and it's just kind of touched on for like 45 minutes of the film, and I struggle with that. Like the other hour and 15, I just feel is very.
I never understood what the desire to break out even meant, because relative to the Pink Opaque's world in the TV show itself, they live in suburbia. They live in contemporary America relative to the people who are watching the show. So I'm just genuinely confused as to what it even means to break out of that and into something else, because it's not as though if he is Isabel, you know, she is going to end up somewhere else aside from, I guess, maybe feeling more genuine. You know, I guess maybe that would be like
presumably if she was buried alive, would wake up to the world of the Pink Opaque if what, you know, Maddie said was true, right? That in fact they are just trapped in a realm, they're meant to get out of it. Superhero movie. Well, we could see them get out of it, and that the real world for them is the Pink Opaque. That this world that's a parable for childhood is actually objectively real, and everything else is a facade that's put on them by this big bad. And then we're, you know, Act 3.
Sounds like a very dangerous thought.
Well, but it's also like really, really interesting. And I mean, it's like, it's a thought that I've had and I've played with a lot of, like, if this world's not real, what is outside the sim? If this is the sim, what's beyond that, right? Or what's beyond the sim within the sim, you know? And those questions, I think people ask.
I like the fact that they made Maddie sound like she just broke out of a health clinic, you know, for like after having been in there for like a decade because of some sort of like manic episode where she like almost burned her house down.
I personally didn't feel that way though.
That her whole A pose after she came back and everything like that. It's like,
I don't feel like it's necessarily like the Pink Opaque is the real world, but it's like it's the rejection of the Luna juice, right? It's the rejection of Mr. Melancholy that is the real world. It's like people that live in the middle of nowhere without telephone or internet, like that are just living every day in nature or whatever. Like that's that's the real world. And then the world that we're all placed into, especially if you grew up in suburbia, is Mr. Melancholy's world. Like that's what we're all forced to drink the poison of, and like the bitter pill of like, sorry, but this is really what it is. Like, this is life. It's full of all these ups and downs, and people die and bad shit happens, and sometimes good shit happens too.
Right.
It's not necessarily like the world as we view it as children is correct, but it's like we haven't drank any of the Luna juice yet, you know.
I do actually want to ask that question based on that, and I agree. I think your take is, in my opinion, more in line with what the filmmaker was probably going for. Now that you've said it, and like your parable with the pink opaque and the rejection of the Luna juice, I think there's a lot to that. I am curious how people took Maddie coming back. If people like, it's really fascinating hearing Jose, you saying that, you know, it does seem like she broke out of an insane asylum, you know, and I'm curious what were people's take on her explanation of, one, what happened to her, what she did, like being buried alive, going to Texas, getting out of this world, coming back, you know, and what was your take on that? Did you think it was real or did you not? And
I think she was as crazy as the directorial choice to put two music videos right next to each other, sandwiched. Yeah, I thought she was that crazy.
That's a perfect example of indulgence. We will touch on the music.
That crazy.
What did you think?
Yeah, Hannah, I haven't heard from you in a while. What did you think of Maddie's character and her return?
I want to hear Matt on it. I'm more interested in your take.
He's a stalwart defender of whatever's happening here.
Yeah, if you know, I'm of two minds of it. If it is the case that the pink opaque is the way that potentially life ought to be, where we don't all have to struggle all the time for everything. If that is the case, then she went out and she discovered herself, and that was her being buried and coming back to life. Like the death of what you thought you were, and being born again into realizing who you really are, figuring out who you are. Like, that's a big part of growing up, and it takes a long time, and it takes some people longer, and some people never do it, which is kind of like where Owen is. So you know, every time I try to think about the movie literally, I'm like,
yeah, same.
Run away from
cloud.
it.
Yeah. Yeah, let it be nice and opaque up there. Yeah, because the moment that you try to draw too much resolution in, you're like, oh Lord, no.
What is this? Yeah.
So Hannah, what did you think in that return of the character?
I think she said, I came a very long way to find you.
Mm-hmm.
And so like that's my take on why, like, based on, I'm literally like building like my idea of this movie as I go, heavily based on what Matt's saying, because I like it. But yeah, I think that that's what it is too, because if you look at the characters, like presumably Tara's character is a lesbian, you know. I don't know if they say that out loud. Like, I presume. And, you know, so is Maddie's character. And it's almost like she gets to, and like one of them, you know, like Tara's character looks kind of like 90s, like lesbian vibe a little bit. And, you know, it's like Maddie's character goes to live as that, as who she sees herself or who she wants to be. And I think it's the same thing for Owen's character. Is like, I'm assuming, you know, if you make it literal or figurative, doesn't matter. You know, if he is Isabel, then he's probably feeling very out of place living in this other realm, in this other universe, other world. And I think that that's what, like, when you're a kid, I assume you just get to be you know, for very different things. Like I don't have that particular thing going on, but I feel like when I was existing as a child, and it's one of the reasons I romanticized my childhood in my head, is because I wasn't like constrained by all these like boundaries and like what I should look like and like how I should talk to be accepted into society. I was just being me. And I think that's what we leave when we move into adulthood, is all this extra baggage, or the Luna juice is I mean, at least how you said it. So I think I think it's like she came back to get him.
Mm-hmm.
Like, let's go, you know?
Yeah. It's interesting because on my first watch, took it extremely literally, to be honest. And like, she came back from the other world. It is what she said. If I assume that my characters are telling me the truth, which in a story, especially with ambiguity, all I have are what the characters are telling me. So it was interesting. It wasn't until this watch, and I wonder if it's because I could kind of feel the energy, but I could see a little bit more of the, you know, maybe she's not telling the truth, or maybe it's not accurate, maybe, but it's interesting because we have our main character, we have him watch the last episode and know, like, you are not my father, this is not real, all of you are fake. And so again, I really took it as, this world is false, you are in a false reality that you were forced within for, you know, in order to defeat the abilities that you had that were a threat to someone else. And you will be stuck here if you do not bury yourself alive, which what is more terrifying than that? If that's the way out of the sim, how many people are going to get out of the sim? Like, not very many. Like, that's an incredibly difficult thing to do. And it is a very disturbing thought to put in, to put into film. But it's one that I think more people possibly resonate with than we have been able to converse up to this far. So I watched it from that angle because I have had that thought, you know, of how would one get out of the sim. And when that's brought up to the character of like, yeah, I literally came back to a false world to try to find you. And 8 years passed because seconds are years. And so even if she was only in the pink opaque world for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, I mean, that was 8 years in the real world. And all of those things are actually lining up with what they're saying throughout the film. It's consistent in that way. However, it was also different because I did skip over the music moments on my first watch because I was genuinely angry about the amount of a song I was listening to. That I actually skipped over it and then got to the conversation, was like, oh, cool. And then there was another song and I was like, absolutely not. And didn't know how long that was. But I will say both of those songs nested outside that conversation made it feel less real as well.
Skipping the Shrekking,
so, exactly. Like, it just feels less, like I'm in, I don't know. It feels both. I'm not in reality, but I'm also too in reality because I was forced into this like musical moment, which was really frustrating for me.
It is,
but yeah,
it is always great when a movie has enough meat to have a Rorschach test to itself in that way. Because me personally, I didn't think that any of it was real ever. You know, I from the very beginning, seeing what the characters were doing, you know, really made me feel as though what I was genuinely watching was more clinical than fantasy, right? Because if you note, right, when Owen begins hanging out with Maddie the second time, right, when and she's watching the TV, right, she gets up and she's like has like a tear in her eye, you know, while watching it. All the while also coming up in a very abusive household, which to me I was like, okay, so she's actively trying to disassociate as best as you possibly can from her reality, and this is the anchor that she's picking in order to be able to do so. I was like, okay, solid. And the other reason why I didn't feel that way, why I felt that way, is because if, in my mind's eye, right, if there were a genuine magical connection that happened with the pink opaque, I thought that perhaps it would have been just as resonant with Owen the first time he watched it. But for him, it was just like, oh, it was a cool show, you know. But she began incepting the idea that, you know, when I watch this show, I feel like I'm not I am not even supposed to be here. It really felt like she was priming him to get to that position, both as when they were young and also when they were old. I still don't know whether I think that older Maddie is even real, you know, because it's one of those situations like in a Fight Club-esque kind of situation where he is so inside of the ocean of his own ennui that perhaps this is his Tyler Durden essentially coming back and being like, hey, you remember that show we used to watch maybe 3 times together when we were young? that is actually what's happening here, you know. And slowly but surely, she tries to make him accept the fantasy in a very fatal way, right? In like she's actively trying to make him kill himself in this way in order to be able to prove the fantasy real. And he decides to escape away from it. But in doing so, unfortunately, all he does is escape into reality, right? Midnight Realm / reality, wherein already he doesn't feel like he fits in anyway. So it's like it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation for him.
Well, we
in
were.
that way.
I will.
And that's how
Yeah.
that's how in my literalist view of the movie I watched it, because also that whole scene where he like stuffs his head in the TV, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? He's like actively trying to like go into it, and you know, I'm like, oh, all right, homie, where's the scars from you like
That's what I
stuffing your
mean.
face into the TV? You know what I mean? Or
That's
like,
where I feel like it's a little breaking from what you're saying, where like you're putting it into reality with like a Tyler Durden, that kind of thing, which is very much grounded in our reality of trying to make sense of that world.
I mean, for all I
But
know,
we
he
got-
could have watched Fight Club in the midst,
No,
in
but-
between. You know, he obviously seems very susceptible to media, right? We don't know what kind of media he watched. And funny
I just
enough,
think you're extrapolating a lot there.
light, funny thought that I had while watching the movie when Maddie was explaining her whole being buried alive. All I could think of was, okay, so she watched Kill Bill Part 2, and she watched that part of the movie where the bride gets buried, and all of a sudden she'd had some sort of like, I'm her kind of moment, and she like burst out of the, burst out of the thing, and like, I just thought about that because of the time that movie came out and the time that she comes back to his life, like really coincides with each other.
Pretty close.
Yeah.
I would just push back on like a lot of other movies are coming into play in your analysis of this movie.
Right.
Is one thing that I would offer of just like we have no reason, or we're not given any story, like we're not giving really any reason that these other films exist in their universe, right? And like, so we're pulling a lot of to ground this in reality. You're grounding it in our reality rather than the reality that the film gives us. And the reality that the film gives us is actually, you said it wasn't fantastical, but it is quite fantastical in the points that you had brought up with throwing himself in the TV and there are no scars, right? That happened. We watched it happen. We can't assume it didn't happen.
Well,
and
it's
then
not
I
even
actively
the
assume
end-
it didn't.
It's
not even the
actually,
same
as the viewer,
universe.
can
yeah, it's a different
actively-
but that's what I mean. It's a different universe
'Cause
than
it's
the one we're
Burger
in.
Zone,
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
shows on TV that we've never heard.
Oh,
of.
okay.
Exactly. So like I
Gotcha.
think you're kind of extrapolating from our reality what theirs would be, but they're in their own universe and it's very separate from our universe. Like that the universe we watched where the Pink Opaque existed and these
Then
people
why
and the
give me a
Midnight
year?
Realm. What?
So silly. Then why give me a year? You know, it's like, because in my mind's eye, right, again, as the viewer, right, I hear 1996 and then I hear 2006. And I'm like, okay, that means that I understand the pop culture and historical considerations that occurred within this time. I mean, Bill Clinton is the president in this reality, you know. It
it's
isn't like,
like-
it's Will
I
Linton.
think that's a
That's
preference.
true,
So
but
it's
it is
like-
it's like an alternate.
Yeah.
It's like a bizarro world.
Well, and it's even without that. I mean,
don't
you
know.
can't. I would say.
I mean, I
would
can
say,
believe it. I mean, it's just hard because the movie, again, maybe this is the sloppiness of the movie, but I, as the viewer, don't feel to be primed to assume this is 100% all different.
No,
Right.
so
Yeah.
one thing, I mean, it's clear a preference for yours too, that when you watch a movie, it's fundamentally grounded in reality, but actually going into any movie, that's one of the best gifts of filmmaking is anytime we walk into a new movie, we are technically stepping into potentially a completely different universe, a universe in which whatever we want to make possible, we can make possible.
I only
and
ever
this
feel that
movie,
way.
And this movie does that a lot and gives us this feeling of not our reality with tons of choices when it comes to like the lighting. The lighting is extremely specific throughout this film. It's very pink, it's very blue, it's very lit. We're very aware. We're not watching a naturalist conversation in a kitchen with a lamp and overhead lighting and like the lighting we have right now, which you use the term clinical. You know, we actually are having a very cinematic lighting effect that gives this feeling that we are not in a reality that we understand by our terms of reality. Well,
Yeah.
and see, and that I would say is just a
Really?
filmmaking.
Not whatsoever.
Oh, man.
So that's
See, and
absolutely the filmmaking
my
choices.
issue, and my
Yeah.
issue just comes from the meta anchors that the movie throws out, right? If the movie had never given me a time, if the movie had just said, this is suburbia out in space, Twilight Zone-esque, I would be more willing to concede those points.
Was there
right?
any other anchor than the year?
Huh? No. It's
Yeah,
just
that
the fact that
seems
the
like
year
a-
goes by.
And Bill Clinton.
And Bill Clinton. And the
Bill
fact
Clinton.
that.
We didn't
and
have-
the fact
nobody
that
said Bill
2000
Clinton, by the way.
That's
True.
a
No one
saxophone,
said
man.
that.
Yeah, that's true. They didn't
And
say,
they had
but they
Al
did
Gore.
say
I
the
mean,
same.
if you look at the thing, it has Al Gore on the actual what's it
Yeah,
called?
Ross
roster
Perot.
situation.
Yeah, I saw real names, which is that's true.
It's an
Okay.
LG TV in 2007. So it's
LGTV.
just like,
But
sure.
again,
sure.
it's not a non-fiction film, and it never I wouldn't
As the
ever go
viewer-
into a
as
film
the viewer,
assuming
this is
non-fiction.
how I felt,
Yeah,
right?
but I think
Did
it's
you-
a really interesting thing that you go into film assuming non-fiction. That's really
I'm
interesting
not
to me.
assuming that it's nonfiction. I'm assuming that, I'm not thinking that these people, right? It's like, I'm not.
Therefore,
like,
none of the experiences they go through have to be grounded in reality, though. If none of the people are
especially
real.
if, again, I consider these people going through some sort of psychotic break. I
But
mean,
it's
like,
funny that you assumed that. I think is only grounded in going into it assuming our reality.
What's your
Right?
What are you guys' preference on how to is this movie better as a sort of literal sci-fi drama, or is it better as like theory crafting?
I think the way that you took it, which was even less literal than mine, I think was actually what the filmmaker was going for. It was really fascinating you saying that.
but
you
is
know,
that better?
the pink better. I mean, we can go into like story better from a craft standpoint, as in it's telling a story, or it's making me at least feel the point of why this story was told. Then yes, because it's now at least I can leave being like, here was the reason why I watched it. And from a craft standpoint, I learned this, and this because they went this strange metaphorical approach that again was like even less literal than the way that I took it. Do I think that we can still have that approach and attach story structure so we have less underlying confusion that I think we're highlighting in this conversation? Yes, absolutely. So I think both of those can exist. But I do think that what the movie was maybe touching at was really highlighted in what you said earlier, Matt, where it's like the pink opaque is our childhood essentially. And as we get older and Mr. Melancholy steps in, and it's like we lose the connection to the way we actually view reality, which makes us feel like we are in the wrong reality, which is the film. We are in the wrong reality. And that's confirmed at the end of the film, in fact. And so I think that metaphor is really the crux of it. And then still what Hannah pointed out earlier is it takes, an hour to get to potentially that crux, which I think is a problem fundamentally.
It's
but yeah.
brave.
This movie reminds me of The
Agreed.
Witch.
Yeah.
That's what it reminds me of.
This movie reminds you of The Witch?
Yeah, relative to the whole, is it real? Is it fantastical?
Yeah, we argued about
We've
that for
argued
like
that
an hour.
that was the whole aspect of the movie. That was the whole big clinching aspect of our conversation there. In that, because the movie again, like this one, is a little bit of a Rorschach test in the sense that, like, do you want to believe that it's the devil actively taking over this girl the whole time, or is it a Cabin Fever-esque situation wherein being out in the woods by yourself eventually causes this kind of isolation to just mount and religious paranoia to simmer and bubble to the degree that the movie ends.
I don't remember that film either. What were you going to say, Hannah?
This is a perfect example, I think. At least, I think your view is really consistent, but we did have this same debate with The Witch. And like, for me, like, I view film as really like personal to every viewer. So whatever you take from it, enjoy. That's your gift, like that's what you get, whatever it means the most to you as. And in The Witch, like this movie that we just watched upstairs, I want to take this metaphorically because I think it makes the best movie metaphorically for me. The Witch, I want to take perfectly literally. I want the story that I watched to be exactly what happened in that movie. And it's just like, it's because I think the movies are better in those different veins. And I think that that's a great way to look at it, is like, however you take it, however you get the more out of the movie and however you enjoyed it more.
Does the directorial intention even matter if the one way you like the movie makes it better inside of your mind die.
Well,
I
it
feel
matters
I
to
feel some
Lindsay.
type of way. Yeah, I feel some type of way.
So
'cause
they're separate.
I know. I do have to say
Yeah.
too. Like we're watching horror, and horror is inherently about metaphors, and horror is inherently about.
It was a horror movie?
Yes, it's a horror. It's literally classified as a horror
Oh, okay.
genre.
Good
Yeah,
to
it's
know.
a horror drama.
I thought it
Yeah,
was a
and
thriller.
so
a
like
big category.
So that's
A
also where
thriller?
like if you're watching horror and you're being like you're expecting psychological thriller,
Yeah.
you're in the wrong genre. And like and we're actually the conversation about like even my literal of like how
What's the
much of the
horror?
story, how much of the story is
It's a
real.
spectrum.
Yeah, horror
They're
is a
ca-
huge spectrum.
But what was this horror?
so
Oh,
that's
it
what we
was
talked about
on
earlier.
Rage,
Nostalgia
man.
horror? Is that what you guys? Is
It's
that what
definitely
okay.
nostalgia horror.
So there's
Okay. I
nostalgia
didn't
horror,
feel
but there's
scared.
also
No.
again, horror is not about being scared. Horror is about touching on conversations, thoughts that we have as human beings that we can't quite grasp with just reality or base language. So like the whole idea is we need metaphors to have these conversations. And so, the thought that you were having about the witch of, how much of this is leading me to question, the impact of living alone and religious paranoia is probably the point that the metaphor was trying to get you to interact with, but questioning whether or not it's actually real and actually happened is not the point that anybody is trying to make. It's not. There's so much
But
more
it's
that
the
can be
point of our
discussed.
conversation because that's the
Not-
way that
not-
each one of us colors the movie.
Well, and I don't
inside
know
of your
about the
mind's
witch,
eye.
but in this, I don't
and
know
it's
about
the
the
same
witch.
in this one because I like to take a literalist perspective in this type of movie as well. I don't enjoy the whole metaphor of
Well, see, but that sounds like a
children's
but
cloud
that's-
thing.
But
you
see,
know?
that
This is
sounds
so
like a
frustrating
huge.
to me.
No, but that's no, but here's the thing, Jose. It's you not enjoying it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
mean that like. I mean, that's a fundamental aspect of filmmaking. So, like,
What
if you
is?
don't enjoy it,
Which
then I
part?
wouldn't watch every film. That's like what I would say. Because, like, if you're going
What
to
do you
go
mean?
into every film expecting, like, some level of historical accuracy or some level of historical or literal
Lord,
grounding.
no.
Well, but what we're arguing about is what's real and what's not, and that's not the point of the film. And like it's genuinely I find it also like it feels shallow to be like focused on that compared to the depth of the conversation we could be having with what is this metaphor we're interacting with? How is it that we lose our childhood at a certain age, and how do we maybe come back to it?
I think there's
is-
depth
It's
in
just
every
two different
I think
jumping
there's
off
depth in every
points.
single
Yeah.
direction because it's not as though the people having breaks from reality isn't a thing, and in the means by which they characterize those breaks from reality can't also be visualized through the medium of film, and then we as quote unquote sane people view it and be like, okay, how deeply does that go into the rabbit hole of like metaphorical or literal, because some people do experience hallucinations to the degree that one could even showcase in this kind of movie, right? So those are the kind of things that I like to play with when it comes to a movie that has ambiguity with its reality, like this one, especially because we're not living in a fantasy realm, right? We're not.
We are.
We're living in 1996, someplace
No, we're
USA.
living literally in a 1990 fantasy realm known as the Midnight Realm. Like that's literally the movie.
I think the reason
that's
that
literally what we are given.
I think the reason that potentially you don't view this as a horror movie is that this movie like sounds really, I don't know, maybe
Also in a
egotistical.
renaissance of horror, so it's very different from previous.
Yeah.
horror.
It-
So
it-
like
and
we're in a renaissance.
There's a
of horror.
reason this movie reminds me of this other flick called Skinamarink that I don't think you guys have seen, but it only works for me or like people just like me. Like the horror only works if you grew up exactly the way I did. And that's in suburbia, in Midwest, Middle America, in a sort of lower income sort of vibe. Like, I think this movie only works like the way that it's maybe supposed to, or the way maybe the director intended it to work. If you're me.
Well,
Which is
and
what
I will say it's lacking. No, I just do think that that's a perfect example of if it doesn't. and we have already established it's lacking in a lot of ways. And so I think the fact that the horror does not actually translate to very many people potentially is a fundamental problem of the film. Like, you know, we think about other really successful horror films, right? Or like a horror psychological thriller film, for example, like Get Out, right? That was classified as horror, different type of horror. And even though I don't have the exact experience as our main character by any means, I leave that film understanding way more about this experience that's being presented because they use the metaphor of the horror analogy to enhance the level of oppression that they're talking about. And it allows people that don't have that experience to understand it more clearly. And I think that's what's so brilliant about horror is you can use a metaphor to now make reality make more sense to people who maybe wouldn't understand that reality. So I agree with you that it kind of did resonate more with potentially like a specific person or audience. And I think that's an example in how it was lacking. And I do think if they changed their story structure and had to edit and cut, if they had double the material and cut it in half, it would have been a lot better.
But is it better to go for a universalizing aspect than, you know,
this is
try
what
to go
I'm
for
wondering
the
is like,
actual, you know, because again, maybe going back to what I said initially, maybe this is a situation wherein my cultural differences, you know, just make it so the perhaps the underlying resonance of the movie of the suburban ennui doesn't hit as universally, you know, in a universalizing way as perhaps it does to you guys, it sounds like, you know.
That's the other half of the setback coin. Like,
Because-
sure, it's a setback here,
like
but
you
on the
said
other
for Get
half,
Out.
it fucking got me.
Exactly.
Like-
So, and I don't think the point is to universalize by any means. I think what you're saying is a great point. I just do think that it obviously is lacking some things when it comes to just being able to translate its story to still people who maybe don't understand it.
It's lacking
perfectly.
universality.
Yeah, but I don't think we make it for the universality. We make it to be really clear on our point of view, and those are moments that I think the director writer wasn't actually clear on their point of view, wasn't actually clear on their story perfectly, and that's why it kind of doesn't translate that well. And that's where we see, you know, just moments of indulgence or like a period of time where we're left in kind of this ambiguity, and it's, I think, meant to make us feel off in the midnight realm. You know, reality is off, but do we need an hour of that, or do we need 15 minutes of that to get the point? You know, and that's just the, I think, filmmaking questions that do come up. But
Preference.
Yeah, maybe it's also as a result of the fact that I never got to see what they were escaping to.
exactly,
You know,
that's
they're
the
in-
story structure lacking.
Yeah, that's
Mhm.
that's another big issue why I went in such perhaps a literalist perspective, because there's nothing that he's striving
Right.
toward, right? It's
Right.
like if it's
Agreed.
a situation where it's like your family is waiting for you in the real world, Isabella/Owen, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
And it's like
agreed.
this is like this is what you're striving for, and this is what makes this dark realm reality not be real as opposed to this one, you know?
That sounds like a
I
Disney
agree.
movie.
Well, but
Well, I mean, the
and-
movie's
Little bit.
already pretty much in that line anyway,
Yeah,
right?
it's pretty close.
But-
and I
so
think
it's
they
like-
could have dug more into the
so
horror
because of
and
that,
more into
because
that.
of that
for
literal
sure.
amount of ambiguity, it leaves me, right, as a person who likes to see if there is some sort of kernel of, are these people losing their mind kind of situation, you know? It gives me ample to play with in the
Agreed.
same
That
way,
makes
in the
sense,
same
yeah.
way as in The Witch, because it doesn't seem like the director wanted to give all the answers here, which makes sense. This is the bridge film, right?
I'm upset about that. I
Well-
don't want that to be the, like, I wish that in my head canon, that's
You wish
not
that
true.
that
This
wasn't
is
the
not a
case
middle
because
movie.
there's more movie, there's more things,
and it could potentially ruin the way that I'm viewing
Well,
it.
it seems like each movie is potentially still pretty separate. It seems like from the very little that I read is that the other one is also going for like, let me convey a feeling to you
Yeah.
through like metaphorical concepts is what it was kind of looking like from what I saw. I don't know that. But when you said that, I was like, oh, that makes sense from the little that I did read about that. So I don't think you're maybe far off. And I don't think it maybe be like a sequel that we're following these characters with the next movie. I think it's, again, trying to make sense of a reality when reality is off. And we're going to be playing with that same concept, I think,
Motif.
probably in the third
Yeah.
one.
Yeah, I'm a little confused about the last scene, and maybe you guys can help me. Not like, I guess, the penultimate scene. He's in the bathroom and he rips himself open.
Yeah.
Inside of him is TV.
The TV glow.
Yeah, exactly. It's
I
like
didn't get that.
I didn't
I
like.
don't
What
know.
does that mean?
I don't know how to
relative
tie
to
that.
relative to what is being said, and if that's supposed to showcase to him that that's his actual reality, you know, that's another one of the things that make me automatically feel, okay, we're looking at some sort of basket case situation here because of the fact that he thinks he's made of TV, You
So-
know,
so
like
it's-
is
Oh, he's like Patrick
So
Bateman.
no,
or
that's
something.
something that I need to point out because we would only think that there's a basket case situation happening if somehow the information we're getting as viewers is different from the information our character is getting. And there's no point in this movie that we're getting fundamentally different information from. So for example, with this is like Fight Club, the example you gave.
Okay.
We are given the information that this character is not actually real to him. And we are given moments throughout the whole film to clue us in that reality is not, that this character that he sees everywhere is not real. And there's a bunch of filmmaking choices, writing choices, and fundamentally a realization in the writing that we now know that to be the case. And so there's nothing in this film that we see that like he's opening himself up. We don't cut to now he's in an insane asylum and that maybe never happened.
I mean, we
you know?
cut to
And
him
so,
putting his shirt back on and it not having anything going on afterwards. I mean, like there's a lot of dissonance in
yeah.
what happens next and what just happened prior.
sure, but assuming it didn't happen
His
at all.
father
is
found him in the
wild.
basement, right, and with his head in the TV, and then put him under the shower while he yelled, "You are not my father."
Right.
How on earth is it that he's still walking around in that way?
That's
right?
what I'm saying.
Like,
You're viewing,
how-
it's not a real world. It's the midnight. That's the point. He literally realized he's not in the real world. He shoved his face into the TV. We are confirming the fact that it's not a real world, and you're now still trying to ground it in our reality.
No, I'm trying to ground it within the concepts of what the movie's showcasing. Like I'm trying to understand is him in that instance, right? Is him like reality shattering because it obviously doesn't seem to work, or is it like a situation because right afterward he becomes 20 years older, right? So is it like a situation where when he does that glass breaking in, like that's supposed to like accelerate the simulation that he's inside of, you know, to like weaken him even more? You know, because I'm trying to
I
believe.
think the way you're
because
analyzing
he
this
is inside
like,
of a
I genuinely
simulation
don't
made by
even
Mr.
know how
Melancholy,
to-
supposedly, right?
Yeah.
Wherein he is like, where he is Owen, but he's supposedly Isabel, right? And Maddie / what's the other name of the other lady?
Tara.
Tara.
Right? Is supposed to be able to come in, you know, in like spurts because of the time dilation, right? To be able to try to save him. But yeah, I don't know.
I don't
it's
even know
just
how to
so
bridge.
lacking.
No,
So
I mean,
lacking.
well, there are lacking things of the movie, but you're in like kind of a different world of where you're viewing the film, and I don't know. I don't know. I don't even know how to like bridge the communication a little bit in like where you're viewing it from is so
You're just wondering,
like outside
how-
the choices in the film itself. That's what I'm having a hard time
I'm talking about the scenes themselves. I'm just I'm
No, but
talking
you're
about what
extrapolating
the
to
lead up
beyond them.
is, because again, the penultimate scene, himself
Yep.
Mm.
and inside of there being
The
or-
TV glow. I saw the TV glow, the title. He's not of this world. He's confirmed. In fact, he is in the midnight realm. We know it. We see it. It's confirmed to us. He literally is seeing he is made of TV. And he goes back to his world, says, I'm sorry, because he cannot break with his reality.
Okay, so then
as
he is inside of a
understands it.
simulation made by Mr.
Yes,
Melancholy, right?
that is
okay, which
what
is
we've
what I'm
got.
saying, right?
Yes.
So when he put his head through the TV within the simulation, right, was that a moment wherein essentially he like disc scratches
Yeah.
the simulation?
It's like a
and
break. Yeah,
and then he
it's a
gets sent
glitch.
20 years into the future.
Oh, I don't know about sent 20 years.
You know.
That's an extrapolation.
Relative to the
but-
simulation, he gets sent 20 years into the future to weaken his body and make him more wheezy and
No,
like
I think
missing
he just went
time?
through life.
like missing time kind of.
Yeah, you know
phenomenon?
how in the beginning Tara's like, oh, like, you know, years began skipping, you know, one after the other very, very quickly, right? And I'm wondering if that section right there is supposed to be a visual representation of what she's saying, if you want to take in the fact that this is all in a simulation, right?
Well,
like
we're given-
the midnight realm simulation, and she's like, and like he finally gets to feel that like time skip.
I like the idea
situation.
that this was the first time, because like I think everybody does this at some point. Maybe not. This might be another interesting difference between the way you grew up as a young child. But like I think there's a moment for everybody. Yeah, we've talked about this too, where like you sort of realize like there was like glass shattering moment of like, oh no, like am I like shitty to be around? Am I like infantile? You know, like, Oh, I think I can't play with toys anymore. Like I just don't like I used to have GI Joes when I was a kid and we'd play in our bedroom,
yeah, that's a
on
really
the
good point,
floor.
yeah.
And then at some point it was just like,
Gone.
oh no, like it's not the same.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe I just like, because I hate viewing it literally. I
Well,
like the idea that
it's
was
not
the
the
first
point,
time
yeah.
that he was like, oh fuck, oh no, like
Yeah.
I can't stand it.
Yeah.
He saw the real world for the first time and he was like, fuck no,
But
no.
we still do
shit.
go through the monotony of life. Like he gives us a narrative of then this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened.
It's
So
kind of
like
like-
we get a summary of what happened over the last 8 years, or whatever. Like he gives us that. And again, if we're assuming that everything we're giving is false,
It's like it's like a
false, that
glimpse
won't
into like the
work.
communion absurd that he had, where he like realized, oh shit, I'm in a fun center as an old ass man, with a with a cap and
45 years old.
This
and-
isn't right. This isn't supposed to be correct, Yeah. I wonder, because being an artsy film, like you said, it's like I do wonder how much of those philosophical considerations they try to apply, within the scenes like that.
Well, that's definitely again, the horror genre especially is very much rooted in that. I mean, it's also in line with magical surrealism, magical realism, right? And so like it's really living in these genres that are not meant to be like what we are given is what we're seeing, right? And then we can obviously think about it whatever way we are going to, which is always fantastic. Assuming the things we're given are somehow like deceitful to us as the viewers is a level of meta that is not I have not yet seen in film, like the fourth level of meta that I haven't necessarily seen in filmmaking. But yes, the artsy quality, the filmmaking aspect of it. I mean, that's one thing I do like about it is a lot of the choices are meant to make us feel like this reality is not ours. The colors, the clothing, the
Liminal
way they're
space.
talking to each other, the literal spaces that we're in feel magical or surreal or just slightly weird. Even that first shot of the chalk on the ground and the truck at the other side of the street in this like very colored lighting. I mean, that's not how the sun looks. That's not how the moon looks, and so we are rooted immediately in a universe that's not ours. That's and fundamentally it's not our character's universe either. And I think that's what makes it so hard is eventually we get to that point.
It's very dreamcore.
Yeah, very dreamcore.
Super cool.
I don't know. I'm curious if Hannah's opinions have changed as the conversation is
My
going on.
opinions have been pretty stable, I think. I like the metaphorical like approach. That's my favorite way to interpret the film. And I feel like a lot of it hits home for me when I like go back through it from that lens of like a lot of it. Like that's why I was like I want to hear what you think, is because I feel like a lot of the movie became really relatable for me after that moment.
Yeah, when you said that, I was like, a little bit more, because I still struggle with the things that we've talked about. But when you touched on that, it all of a sudden was like, oh, even I was taking it a little too. I was married a little too intensely to the structure and the absence of it. And when I think about the pink opaque being a literal metaphor for like childhood and like the loss of
But his
that.
childhood sucked. That's another thing,
No, it didn't,
Not to
because he
everyone,
lived
yeah.
in TV, which is like what you do as a suburban kid.
Yeah, I
because
grew up in the TV.
there's
yeah.
not like, okay, sure, you go play outside with your friends. That was part of at least a little bit of being a nice. It's probably not the same anymore, but like that's part of like, because okay, so just to broaden it a little bit and hopefully make more sense, like when you grow up in a really like kind of shitty house with like adults that are shitty, like abusive or alcoholic or whatever, your escapes are the TV, mainly the TV and some video games, and then like going to play out with your friends. So where you grow up is in fantasy world, and this only like exacerbates the realization that this isn't real life. Like especially because you're a kid and you become so tight, everything becomes so part of your identity.
There's something really special there was something really special about late night Cartoon Network
Ugh.
kind of vibes as a kid. And like, I think for me, it was like those that wasn't always available. Like it was after my bedtime that everything got really cool. And for me, it was more like Courage the Cowardly Dog, right? Than like Goosebumps and that kind of stuff. But like when I got to watch like late night kids TV, it was so much like this whole other universe. Like because you're so engrossed in it and you're a little schizophrenic, you know, and it's just, you get all the way sucked in. And I think that they're like the first time they go to Maddie's house and they're watching that show, that's exactly what that felt like for me, as I was like, oh, they got to go to that cool world that doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah. So does that make sense? Like the feeling of like, shit, how do we start this? About like how you grow up in fantasy world, you know, as a kid. Maybe you didn't do that as much.
I'm curious, do you romanticize your childhood?
Ooh,
Romanticize
yeah.
it. I mean, maybe it's also just the kind of programming one had available too. When I was a little kid, around the age that TV felt really transformative, I was watching a lot of Discovery Kids. So I didn't really watch a lot of fantasy TV. I watched a lot of children's based nature shows and like things about like, oh, the past, like, you know, galaxies and like, you know, dinosaurs and stuff like that. So yeah, I don't know.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, like, again, it's like it really all just comes down to the rooting of how one views, you know, each one of those things, which is perhaps why I'm such a proponent to the death of the author, you know, and that I don't really care like the considerations that the director had while making the movie, because I'm now viewing the movie and I will be the one to pretty much have to process this. And it's not as though I care about whatever rubric of intentionality that they had, because they could totally miss, you know, or they could hit in a completely different way that they didn't even see possible, because there's no means that they can have such a high level of clairvoyance as to how that, you know, what they're trying to showcase will apply to people.
Sure. Yeah.
And also, not everybody is equipped with the same kind of nostalgia goggles that can provide you the kind of vision that can give you a pink view of, like, you know, this situation. Right?
Whoever made this movie made it for me, which is weird. And like, you know,
Maybe you
a
should
couple
watch
other thousand people like
maybe
me.
we should watch the first one. Maybe it makes more sense.
Maybe. I don't have to look into it. I just don't want to get let down. Should we go to ratings? We're coming up on like a 90 or...
Yeah. I don't really have anything else to say, really. Especially considering it's a bridge film. I mean, yeah.
I'm just so upset by that. I'm gonna pretend that's not real.
Well, I think it's a standalone within them. Is what it's giving. I mean, it's obviously they're gonna be maybe of a shared universe-ish, or it's they're maybe playing with shared themes.
Is it a cinematic?
But I
I'm
don't
okay
think
with
it's-
shared themes.
I don't think it's because it looks like the character in the first film has nothing to do with
Yeah.
this film.
That would
So
make
I think
Very
it's-
little sense.
I,
yeah.
exactly. I think it's playing with this theme that they're working with in this one.
Wasn't
yeah.
Sorry, this is
Oh,
totally off the
please.
wall. It's just something that I was thinking about. Was it Goosebumps or one of those shows that the kids like sat around like a campfire? Are you afraid of the dark?
Mhm.
I appreciate the tie back to the campfire
Mhm.
throughout the movie.
Well, that's supposedly the
Two.
first movie.
Huh?
That's supposedly the first movie.
No, Are You Afraid of the Dark? Isn't the
No, that whole them being like that is supposedly a tie back to the first movie, because the first movie is something called we're all no sorry it says we're all going to the World's Fair, but apparently like poster.
Yeah, but like original influence, right?
Mhm.
There's some kind of
Yeah.
message in there that I think is
Absolutely.
really profound with him sitting at the campfire by himself. Like it hits home in some kind of like special
Yep.
way.
which I think
Just
is
want to throw it in.
no, I agree, and that's part of I think the nostalgia aspect of it. The fact that you're watching that and you're almost getting nostalgia from the show it's referencing is super smart.
So your homework is to watch Skinamarink.
I don't know about. We'll see. It sounds
Because-
really upsetting based on the title.
No, you.
It has
you-
nothing to do with
You
skin.
might, like Hannah, think it's the most boring, stupid movie ever.
I
But-
just want to be clear. I have such an appreciation for what it was doing, and I do feel what it does. It did it too long and too
Yep.
slow for me. Like I literally
Taste it.
could not wait for the end of
Yeah.
Skinamarink.
That's still.
But-
that's yeah.
But I so appreciate what it did. It's nostalgia horror.
Yep. Oh, good to know. Yeah.
And it's of the same variety. Like I feel like I wouldn't have got this movie that I saw the TV Glow as well if
If
I
you hadn't-
hadn't have seen.
Well, and I
Skinamarink.
think it was helpful for me to see this a second time because I stop. I mean, it's even just seeing a few movies that I've seen a second time. It's obviously I go into it not questioning so much the world I'm in, but just like accepting it. And I could see that if I had seen another of the same genre
Yep.
prior, that would have maybe had the impact. But I mean, I'm with you with this one though, Hannah, because I mean, I feel like it's still, this one's really lacking. Like it explores really interesting concepts and it does those well also, but it is too long and it's, I don't know if that's still what you think. I don't know of this one.
I have significantly more enjoyed talking about it than watching it. And I think
Yeah, I feel that way too. That's
Yeah.
actually why I kind of wanted to, yeah.
Yeah. And I think that says something more. Also, I think we should watch Skinamarink just so we can watch Jose be like, these kids have lost their minds.
Yeah.
Why are they doing
Does
this?
that sound like is that a horror movie too, or what?
Technically,
Oh, okay.
it's nostalgia horror.
Yeah, and I don't know if it will hit for you.
Yeah,
Well, it's
Oh, that sounds
it's,
I mean, it's
in a
something I'm
similar
trying
vein.
to think if I can find a like
sounds
an
fun.
article or something for like how like experiencing film in the because you are going into it like
Death of the
like
Author,
the
baby.
childhood like the Discovery Channel a little
You
bit.
can't
And I'm like
do-
that's not what that all
I mean,
films are.
Yeah, and I wouldn't do that if this was set in a fantastical realm of Talisigar or
It
whatever.
is.
But
It
it isn't.
literally
It's
is
set in
set-
1996 somewhere America.
No, but
and
Jose,
even if they are inside of a simulation,
It's
right?
set in the Midnight Realm. It's literally set
Well,
in a fantastic
That's not
realm.
what they say. They say
That
it's
is
built.
what
They
they
say it's
say.
set in 1996. The Schizo girl says that they're in the Midnight Realm, and how am I supposed to believe her? She buried herself alive.
She buried her. No, she had a burnout helper.
Oh right.
Oh no,
right.
she did bury herself alive the
The
second time.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right.
Somehow, some way, she like spirit like channeled her way to.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Dan to
it's
Dan
just- If
hand.
we go into like questioning every single,
Who was gonna bury them if they would have gone together that night?
Presumably, she had somebody. We're not. I'm not even. We're
Had
getting
another
into
burnout.
That's,
Burnout, yeah.
that's
50
another.
bucks ready. It's like, this is fake money anyway.
Burnouts don't care if they bury.
I mean,
people
she did
alive.
specifically pick the location where the stoners used to hang out.
Yeah.
So she was probably hoping to
She's
bump
hoping
into
that there were some stoners ready to make a quick buck.
Yeah, it's like things never change. The more things change, the more they stay the same. Here's 50 bucks, kid. Buy yourself a hat.
I'm gonna throw 4 stars at it.
Wow.
I was up around 3.5, but the more we talked about it, the more I like it. The more I think that part of that is like it's a movie that was made for me. Like they made it for me.
How nice! How
I
nice
know,
that
it
we.
was
How
so
nice that you
kind
got
of
that
them
today.
to
Yeah.
do that. Yeah.
I'm so happy I could.
Honestly, I thought you were going to be the biggest ejector of the situation altogether.
Oh no, man, this is like super clever. Like I feel like the director and writers for this movie are 35 to 40.
Yeah.
I'm not
Gotta
gonna
be.
look, but that's my.
But
But
yeah,
they feel 50,
It might
like
be the
Owen
same
does
person.
it.
I think the writer director is possibly one. I just didn't remember. We
same.
didn't watch the end,
Yeah.
but I should have paid more attention to the.
Yeah, just as soon as I realized that the color grading and the environments were intentionally surreal and liminal, I immediately started watching it from like the same lens that I watched Skinamarink through. And maybe I was already primed to do that. And so that's why I got to enjoy it so much. But yeah, I don't think I have anything else to add. I think it was great. I loved it. Yeah, 4 stars. How about you, babe?
I'm torn between a 2.5 and a 3. I think that they made it for me, but I think they could have done better. Like I picked up some stuff. I enjoyed myself. For the most part, there were parts of it that I was like, yeah, I said that for parts of it, I was like, when is this movie going to be over? So yeah, I don't think I can give it higher than a 3 if I felt like that.
I have about a 3. I thought the movie was charming as just its own thing, not knowing anything about it. It really did feel like a double A film in like a video game talk kind of way. You know, it's like it didn't have the kind of budget to perhaps have the visualizations that it might have wanted to. You know, there's a lot of what Lindsay said in terms of it being an art house, you know, where perhaps a more seasoned director would have been more willing to hit the editing room and really trim this one down. This one was like, this one's my baby. All right. And we are not shaving a hair off of this one.
Yeah.
All right.
It feels like a lot
All
of
right,
darlings in
one's-
this. Yeah.
This one's my child, and don't you dare touch a hair on him.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know? And I liked it, hearing how you guys felt a resonance with the American ennui that the movie is showcasing, you know, and how it, even though it doesn't hit me, right, it's nice to know the fact that the movie still does what it kind of wanted to in that way, if that is what it, you know, because again, we can't ever really know directorial intent until you talk to them, and even then they can lie, you know.
Yeah.
Or just
Well-
tell they're
Or
not
they can tell you
telling
what they want.
And
Yeah.
like you said, it's not really the point. Once it's out of their hands, it is in the hands of the audience.
Yeah, they don't get to choose
Yeah.
how we interpret it.
Right.
And
Right.
that's
That
how
being
it'll
s-
go down in history.
Exactly. That being said, there are like, you know, there are tactics and there's things that have been built up in the craft of filmmaking and writing and screenwriting and things like that you know, educate us as we're
Therein lies the
looking at
issue, though,
films.
about as how you said that we're going through some sort of renaissance of horror, and
We
how
are.
much of those rules are being thrown out the window as time goes on. And which one of them am I supposed to be like, oh no, but that one's sacred. That rule is not going to
No,
be
and
touched.
it's
Film
not
is
about that.
constantly
It's not about
breaking.
Well, I
that.
think she just means intentionality.
No, I just was referring to intentionality and it being
Yeah.
outside of the director's hands. There's that, and I
Right.
agree with that. And I just mean there's also like, you know, there's the craft, and there's when we're talking about the craft of anything, you know, any field of study, there are ways to communicate about it that is, you know, coming from a space of knowing about that field of study rather than, you know, I guess
This- yeah.
disregarding it, you know, and
that
that's
just
more what
amplifies how artsy this.
I
movie
certainly
is.
don't want to
Right.
call whoever this guy is an auteur, but I guess maybe with it, maybe they are that. You know, like who know, like that again. That's the whole thing.
No,
about,
very
like,
much intermediate
Yeah.
quality.
Mhm,
No,
mhm.
it's yeah. What was your rating? I missed.
Oh, I said 2.5.
yeah. I'm
if I would have been born and raised in this country, maybe it would be a solid 3.5 to
Yeah.
me, just because, you know, I could see myself more at the fun center than, you know, but yeah, having that lensing of not having always been in the midnight realm, you know, having been in the abyssal realm prior to this, you know, and now, you know, midnight has more light than than where I was
It's actually
at
not
before.
so bad here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It makes it so be like, what is everybody complaining about? Because it comes back to the whole aspect of, okay, what's this reality that you're escaping?
right.
You know,
Yeah.
and because they never gave me an inkling as to what that better reality looks like or what they're aiming for, I automatically, because maybe it's more fun for me in that way, I get clinical in my viewing of the. It's like these people are just crazy, you know, like
All of them.
maybe they're all just insane, you know. And again, and I only do that when the movie provides me certain clues
Room.
that I can actually run that through line, you know, within. And though it's not as though we're dealing with children who are well adjusted, right? So it's like, and it's not as though either one of the children who are the leads in the story have such a nice, easygoing life that like, oh, like this is for sure magical going forward, like Narnia.
Yeah.
Like,
For the record, I think it's
I
important.
don't think that those kids are going through a psychotic break. You
Right.
know, like I do think that they went through a wardrobe and ended up somewhere else.
Yeah.
Well,
For me, I
that's
think it's important. Like for me, it's one of the reasons that we've continued on with doing the podcast is because you interpret almost every movie very differently than I do. And I've changed my perspective on many things. And it's just given me like new ways to look at movies that I loved. I've changed ratings on movies based on how you interpreted them and being like, huh.
Yeah, you made me like Django less.
I think I think the diversity for me is really important.
Yeah. Agreed.
What about you? What's your rating? Now that you've seen it twice.
I'm a 2.5. I Probably. I'm kind of a harsh rater in general. I've learned to in just rating a bunch of movies. But yeah, it's still really lacking
Act
for me.
like you never went to graduate school.
What?
It's like act like you never went to like your graduate section of like your
What do you mean?
of like your education. You know,
Like
like you don't have all
pretend?
all that extra nuts and
Wait,
bolts
what do you
of
mean?
your
Why would
I think-
in my rating or what am I acting
just
like?
because you said that you're a very harsh rater. I wonder how much of that is because of the fact that you've been like behind like the
Oh, behind the
Behind
Well,
scenes.
the-
no, I mean
the
I've
curtain and,
rated
like, your
movies as
understanding.
5s, but like and 4s. It's just this movie doesn't have the level of filmmaking qualities, and the story structure is lacking, and the writing's lacking. I don't. There's no way of me viewing anything without the education I've received.
I know it was
and
mostly
without,
a joke, just because
Oh,
of the
I
fact that you're
see.
saying you're such a harsh critic, and I wonder how much of that is as a result of your extra
of
education.
the
and, like,
knowledge I
yeah,
have of the
mhm.
field. Yeah, I would say that probably does make
It
me
can only
harsher,
it can only
but-
sharpen. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The
That's why
scaffold
it's a
that you,
4 for me.
Well,
There's-
no,
no,
I
so-
never went to film school.
There's another thing, and Lindsay, I don't want to project this on you. This is my thing, and I don't know. You might have it in common. There's a similar thing that I think a lot of people have when they went to college for an art thing, where like a lot of people in college for an art thing are very, very pretentious in their art. And Lindsay
Mhm.
talking about there being like a lot of darlings. Like I didn't go for
Mhm.
film, I went for studio art. But I am so triggered by precious, pretentious art because you're
Same.
just inundated with it
Same.
all the time. And it does translate to film for me, where when I see things that are like, you know, like being really ambiguous or being really like confusing because we're being deep. Like
Yeah.
it really gets under my skin.
I feel the same way because I agree. It becomes the ambiguity for ambiguity's sake to me is lazy.
Yep.
And
I agree.
time and taking shots for shots' sakes is pretentious because it's like, look at this cool shot setup I did because I had the money to do it.
Yep.
A little
Is essentially
masturbatory.
what we're doing. And I didn't go to school for filmmaking, and I didn't go to school for writing. You know, I went to school for acting. You
Yeah.
know, so it's like my lens coming at film is really coming from just watching a lot of movies, reading about movies, reading about writing structure, but that it wasn't under a formal education. But yes, and part of the reason why I struggle so much with traditional artist types is because they can get extremely pretentious and precious about their work, and that gets tied to ego, and that gets tied to this is, you know, my way is somehow the right way, and that's not a thing. There is something to be said about standards, and that standards for craft move up when people are able to understand and communicate about those standards.
Mhm.
And that's why I find, you know, subjectivity or pure subjectivity in art very dangerous.
Mhm.
Of just like, well, my opinion is my opinion and it's just as valid. And it's like, yes, and preferences are preferences, but why did it work? And why did it not work? And we can have those conversations if we at least are of a shared level, a shared language level that we can do it. If we're familiar enough with filmmaking techniques and, you know, even just, general things of like how to go into a film and especially like fantastical films. Like you had mentioned Narnia, and, you know, the fact that in that universe, there is a wardrobe that brings them to a fictional land. Like that is the fundamental assumption that we're making. That's the premise we're given. And everything that follows is if these premises are true, this conclusion must be true. So we're given a logically valid structure of these universes we're going into. And when I find movies are lacking, it's when those premises, you know, even if these are true or these premises, one, they're not holding up, but even if these premises are true, the conclusion isn't actually true, right? And that's when their setup is lacking, right? Or, you know, we can always, if as long as it's valid, I don't really, the soundness of it in my reality is not essential. It's not the point. Like how sound it is in the universe I understand is already extrapolating so far from the universe that they've created, you know, and Arrival is a great example of that, you know, and like the universe they created and the premises they set up were spot on. But in our reality, we don't know if it's sound. We don't know if that logic would uphold here. Who knows? But they set it up in such a way that it's really solid. But it's still, this film for me, you know, is it's just, I wish that it had a little bit stronger story structure. I do yearn for our character to be less passive. it brought up such great concepts, and I feel like it could have maybe gone to with either a more I shouldn't say that, a more experienced potentially team. I'm not sure. I don't want to, again, I don't know what they were obviously working with a minimal budget and things like that. And so that adds to a lot. So they might have been already extremely, extremely skilled. And this is a very impressive movie for a low budget film as it is. But yeah, with those missing story structure elements, I just, it's like a 2 or 2.5, but like content that they get into in the last 45 minutes has the ability to be a 4.5 film, you know, and that's what I struggle with. You know, we're getting into this feeling I get when I watch Everything Everywhere All at Once, you know, that's getting into like such an intense qualm in the human existence. And it's doing in this very magical, surreal, absurdist approach, which is justified through the multiverse, you know? So like there's something in that that's so that just it works. They really checked their boxes with that work. And this one, it's like it has the potential with this concept to go somewhere, and it leans into the ambiguity and the pretentiousness for far too long. And I think it just wasn't clear in the story it wanted to tell. And I think that's why we get responses like Jose was bringing up earlier, and even responses I was bringing up, where it's like the lack of clarity of the story they wanted to tell now translates to the audience. You know, and so yeah, that's why I think it sits at a solid 2.5 for me, or 2 to 2.5, I guess. Yeah.
The music didn't help either.
Yeah, those music, I have to say, that music moment, that was ridiculous.
It was pretty frustrating.
It really feels like they had a friend that they wanted to insert into their film for the sake of.
Yeah.
It's very
That's a
unfortunate
vibe.
because I'm sitting here
Promo.
thinking, okay, would I sit down and rewatch this at home with Kimmy right now?
No.
And I would. I would.
really?
I would enjoy watching this movie again to get her opinion on it, but I would probably, like you, skip through the music part
Yeah.
of
Oh
it.
my
It's
God.
egregious,
That's
man.
why I couldn't watch it again by myself.
It feels
I knew I
like
wanted to
wasting
watch.
my time.
It was.
Like,
we
It-
just watched Arcane, which,
Ugh.
by the way, first season, great.
Amazing.
Second season, okay.
That's how I
But-
feel. Oh my God, we should have a
Yeah.
whole conversation about that.
next,
I have
another
so many thoughts about Arcane.
another
But-
I have
episode.
so many thoughts on Arcane.
But just to follow up on that, they, for whatever the show's pretty good. It's pretty good.
It's still good. Yeah.
Animation's really good.
Amazing.
3 episodes in, they animate Imagine Dragons and have them perform in the show.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
And
they
that
sure
is
did.
unacceptable.
Wait a minute. Imagine Dragons, the band?
The band.
I was supposed like the Imagine Dragons. And I was like, and then they dance. I was like,
No, it's way later.
I was like, what's the
We're
problem with
being
that?
literal, Jose.
I just
don't go.
Jose's
fast.
like,
I
yes, I'm
automatically
gonna
don't
go.
think Imagine Dragons and think band, you know?
Thank God.
Yeah.
You're better off for it.
They got the band Imagine Dragons to do us.
Yeah,
Oh,
Yeah.
my
I have a
God.
lot of
Yeah.
thoughts about
Well,
that.
they sing the intro to the show,
It's
so
like in Game of Thrones. And she starts doing that acoustic solo. Oh my God.
But I agree.
That's
with
when
you.
I was like, okay, so this is what the show is.
That
7
first
seasons.
season, though, one of the best shows
Oh.
ever. And then the second season, it had the potential. If they had done 3 seasons instead
Yeah,
of 2, I
stretched
think
it
it
out.
really had the potential. Not even the stretch. It's just if they took their time on each story arc. It's
But
just
this
they
is a
really.
different podcast. We
That
should
is-
definitely-
Yeah.
We should talk about it. To be honest,
It's all in the same spirit of
Yeah.
feeling though.
It's just
great.
it could have been better.
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay. Well, thank you for listening in to.
I
the-
did not dislike it.
Okay.
Mhm.
Good.
Good.
Excellent.
Yeah.
My preferences, I don't know, definitely lie. Potentially also, I don't know. There's something, again, it's touching on something that I think is really worth getting into. But it's just the way they got into it. I was left feeling unsatisfied.
execution.
Wah, wah, wah.
This is one
Meh.
of those instances where I would really love it if we could just somehow always have a guest that has a closer, you know, because obviously you guys, you know, with the whole Suburbia Nui thing, you guys, you know, felt the resonance.
Nailed it.
But yeah, right. They
Got
nailed
it.
it on that part. But apparently, as Lindsay's saying, there is like a sexual fluidity,
Yeah.
like slash trans like discussion underlying this too, which we just cannot
Yeah.
touch it. You know what
We
I mean?
didn't
And
even
it's
touch
like
that, yeah.
bedrock feeling
Yeah.
to it, like in the same way that I can't fully crack into your guys' feeling of the movie. That
Right.
like that one is like adamantium in terms of like
That would have been
I
really
will
nice
say,
to
I
have
would be
represented.
really, really nice to be able to excavate that feeling, you know, because again, it's lethal introspection. I
Yeah.
want, you know, killer thoughts as to what that person's feelings was in relation to having that medium hit them in that way.
Yeah.
And I,
If it's supposed,
Yeah.
especially because, you know,
trans people and gender fluid people have such a drought in terms of representational media that was
Right.
like, this one's for you, kid. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And it's like,
Yeah.
So my coworker watched this, Emily, and she's in the queer community, and I had a little bit of a conversation with her about it. And yeah, she was left feeling frustrated by this film.
Okay.
She had said in a few ways, she just said like, you know, there were some things that she understood. She was really disturbed by the drowning part with the dad. And I should, you know, all of this comes with a grain of salt because I don't think it's super great to, you know, just summarize someone else's opinion, but I
Right.
also think maybe it's just interesting to hear since you guys haven't heard it. But anybody listening, obviously, this is not just as good as hearing it from herself. But and then she said she didn't, you know, there was a lot of problematic narratives happening with, you know, the suicidal ideation and the trans community and being of that, and like
Sure.
the fact that that's where they're jumping again, and that's why I struggle with that lack of clarity in this film, that it's like, oh yeah, the only way to feel right is to not be in this world. And like, that's problematic if we are doing a trans narrative or a queer narrative. And
gigantically.
which is why, and that's not at all what I left the film feeling with.
Yeah.
I didn't even.
It's almost like suicidal white noise.
Exactly.
in that way.
I
Yeah.
didn't even touch that. That narrative is not what sat with me. Mine was more the world feels off, reality feels off, partly because of this disconnect between childhood and today,
Yeah.
and partly because of other reasons. But like for me, I'm not jumping to a queer trans narrative.
It's not
And
your
I think that
lens.
would have been exactly. And so the fact that that does exist in this film, or potentially does, or the writers were potentially somehow involved in this. I didn't research it too intensely, but that made me a little more like, ooh, I kind of liked it less from the vein that seems like its own story, and we need to be telling that from that angle, versus, and the story of reality is off independent of that is its own story. So it's like, if reality is off because of that, now that's its own thing. And I don't know, I just felt that potentially could have, in the points that my coworker was even saying, it seemed like it went down a possibly problematic.
Those are
Mhm.
two very,
Channel.
very clashing ways of thinking. Because
Exactly.
it's like, how, like, as a trans person in that instance, how am I supposed to be taking steps to self-affirm and accept myself as whatever it is that I am, while also being told that I am not of this world?
Right.
Yeah.
You know, like, there's no conquering this world, and there's no means of me being able to climb, you know, whatever, you know, emotional or professional hierarchy there is here. Like, I just don't belong, you know, and I have to go somewhere else.
Yep.
And again, the film doesn't ever provide that other place, that elsewhere, that supposedly everything else is much better in.
Again, that could have been
Yeah.
our act 2. Our act 2 could have been in the Pink Opaque. You know, we would have had our first world. We would have had our act 2 in the Pink Opaque.
I would have had
the bridging.
I would have zero. Oh, this is them losing their mind thing, because they're like,
If
okay,
we
they
actually went to that world versus being told about that world. And I do feel like the story, see, if the movie started, you know, 20 minutes before she comes back, right? And it's like she comes back and she's like, this is what we have to do. That would have been our like act 2 crazy thing that happened. The catalyst would have been her leaving or disappearing potentially. And then that act 2 would have been them being in that world. And how do we figure it out? And now how do we bridge the Midnight Realm and the Pink Opaque to now leave us feeling satisfied as viewers, as millennial viewers that still haven't been able to bridge the gap between our Midnight Realm and the Pink Opaque? Well, now I'm watching this movie and I maybe have a way to be like, this is how I can potentially
It would
merge
change
these
it.
two. It does. It
It
does.
would change it entirely. Yeah, because that's like one of the major points of the movie is like, the Pink Opaque is false. Like,
See,
the
and that's
real
a great
life
point
is
when you say
drinking the
that.
fucking juice. Like,
Ugh.
And
that's
I
life.
hate
Ugh.
when horror movies try to be self-help. Like, I really don't like it when they're like, and here's
Let me
the
scare you into feeling
moral,
better.
Right.
and how
Yeah.
you can stitch it in.
I should-
like,
I should
really,
clarify.
because a lot of horror movies do it,
Exactly.
like
And I should
especially indie
clarify-
ones.
Yeah.
I should clarify, it can't come from that place. It has to come from me. Like
Yeah.
if I'm writing something and I'm like, okay, I'm trying to figure out how I can make sense of the world
Mhm.
to the best way I can. And maybe my way of doing that ends with saying, I'm sorry, ignore what I did earlier. I'm so sorry, I shouldn't have done that. I'm so sorry you had to see that, which is, it hurts to see that be the ending. But
Yeah.
that is maybe where the writer director was like, this is where it ends. And we figure that out. And that's the conclusion they came to. And it's just, I would like to, for me, come to a different conclusion. And again, it's not self-help for anybody else. It's me being like, this is a potential conclusion I can get to in a world that feels inherently off to me. But yeah, if the director's intent is to prescribe it to other people, then it becomes exactly
what I love about the way that the movie ended. And I'm sorry, I feel like we're going into act 2 on this.
Totally fine.
I love that ending where he comes out apologizing and saying like, it's just this medication that I'm on, like new medication or whatever. That makes me like, that is very relatable for me. That makes me grieve a real thing in my life.
right.
And gives me a renewed appreciation. Like, it's a sad story at the end. And in that moment, you're like, it's my story. Like, it's my sad story.
All of our stories.
Yeah. And there's something beautiful about that for me.
Well said. Well, maybe we should just dip out on that.
Cool.
What
Well,
an
thanks
honor.
so much for listening. And tune back in for the next film.
All right. Yeah. There you go. There's your sound.